look at the device in your hand right now. Whether it is a smartphone, a tablet, or a laptop, that screen is a geopolitical hostage. Now think bigger: the electric vehicle parked in your driveway, the advanced medical imaging devices in your local hospital, and even the guidance systems of the missiles protecting your freedom. They all share a single, terrifying vulnerability. They depend on a specific list of minerals. And the processing of these minerals is dominated by one nation, China. The Pentagon has been sounding the alarm for years. But the noise of daily politics often drowns out the signal. We are told that the United States has less than a decade to fix this supply chain before it fractures completely. This isn't fear-mongering, it is a mathematical certainty based on current consumption rates versus accessible reserves. Today, we are not just looking at rocks and mining. We are revealing why America's mineral dependency is the single biggest security threat that is silently ticking away in the background of your life. But here is the question that should keep you up at night. If Beijing decides to turn off the tap tomorrow, does the American economy simply stop? Or is the reality of the situation far more complex than the doomsday headlines suggest? Let's find out. There is a massive cognitive gap between what you hear on the news and what is actually happening in the industrial data. The common narrative is one of absolute helplessness. That China has checkmated the West by locking down the periodic table. And looking at the surface numbers, it is easy to see why. For years, China has controlled the refining capacity for nearly 90% of the world's rare earth elements, 60 to 70% of lithium, and roughly 80% of cobalt. These numbers look like a monopoly. They look like a stranglehold. However, if we dig deeper into the trade data from late 2025 and early 2026, we see a fascinating anomaly. Despite this theoretical dominance, the price of these commodities has fluctuated wildly, and China's actual leverage has shown cracks. Why? Because control and dominance in a market are not the same as weaponization capability. The data reveals a counterintuitive truth. The more a country tries to weaponize a resource supply chain, the faster they destroy their own market share. While the dominance is real, the vulnerability is mutual. The United States is not just a helpless consumer. It is the indispensable market that keeps the Chinese mineral processing machine solvent. We need to look past the scary percentages and understand the flow of capital and technology that actually dictates who holds the power. The threat is severe, yes, but the widely held belief that we are already defeated is statistically false. To understand this war, we must first understand the battlefield. When we say critical minerals, we aren't just talking about raw ore dug out of the ground. We are talking about the vitamins of modern industry. You cannot bake the cake of modern technology without them. Take lithium, the white gold that powers every battery. Take cobalt, essential for stability in high-energy applications. Take graphite, the unsung hero of the anode side of the battery. And then there are the rare earth elements, neodymium, dysprosium, which are actually not that rare geologically, but are incredibly difficult to separate and refine without generating massive amounts of toxic waste. This is the crucial distinction. The bottleneck is not in the mining, it is in the processing. It is like having a field full of wheat but no flour mill. You can't bake bread with raw wheat stalks. For decades, the United States was happy to let China build the dirty, expensive flour mills for these minerals. We outsourced the pollution and the low-margin processing work, thinking we were getting a good deal on cheap components. Now, we realize that by outsourcing the processing, we outsourced our sovereignty. We allowed the definition of strategic resource to be rewritten by a competitor, who understood decades ago that he who refines the ore rules the future. Now, let's dissect the internal logic of this threat. Why hasn't China simply cut off the US completely? If they hold all the cards, why not play the ace? This brings us to the self-cannibalization logic of economic warfare. Imagine a family dispute where the breadwinner threatens to stop buying groceries to punish the cook. If the cook stops cooking, the breadwinner starves, but if the breadwinner stops buying, the grocery store, owned by the cook in this analogy, goes bankrupt. China's dominance in mineral processing is an economic engine that employs millions and sustains local governments. If they were to enact a total embargo on the United States and its allies, they would create an immediate, catastrophic inventory glut within their own borders. Prices would collapse, mines would close, and social instability would rise. We saw a preview of this tension recently, when export controls were tightened on gallium and germanium. It didn't just hurt Western tech firms, it damaged Chinese exporters, who suddenly lost their premium buyers. The weapon of resource denial is a double-edged sword. It cuts the user as deeply as the target. Therefore, the threat is often more effective than the execution. They are relying on the four-D fear of a cutoff to force geopolitical concessions. Because the reality of a cutoff hurts their own economy during a time when their growth is already slowing down. It is a game of chicken, and the one with the biggest inventory holding costs often blinks first. History provides us with a roadmap for defense. We have been here before. In the 1970s, the oil embargoes taught us a painful lesson about resource dependency. That trauma birthed the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and a reshaping of American foreign policy. Fast forward to the present day, specifically looking back at the pivotal actions taken in March 2025. The Trump administration's aggressive expansion of the critical minerals list, adding uranium, copper, potash, and gold, was effectively the declaration of a new kind of independence war. This wasn't just paperwork, it was a signal to capital markets. By officially categorizing these resources as vital to national security, the government unlocked funding mechanisms previously reserved for wartime production. We are seeing the Defense Production Act being wielded not just for tanks, but for mining equipment. The strategy is three-pronged. First, incentivize domestic extraction. Second, and more importantly, subsidize the expensive, messy, midstream processing facilities, so we don't have to ship American ore to China to be refined. Third, stockpile. Just as we hold oil in salt caverns, we are now seeing the strategic accumulation of refined rare earth oxides. This is a structural evolution of the U.S. defense architecture. We are moving from a just-in-time efficiency model to a just-in-case resilience model. It is expensive, it is slower, but it is the only way to ensure that a diplomatic spat in the Pacific doesn't ground the Air Force or shut down Detroit. However, rocks are only half the battle. The ultimate checkmate against a mineral monopoly is technology itself. If a monopolist controls a resource, the market has two choices: pay the ransom or invent a way around it. American and allied innovation engines are running at full speed to engineer dependency out of the system. We are seeing the rise of reduction and substitution technologies. For instance, Tesla and other manufacturers have been actively engineering rare earth elements out of their next-generation motors. We are seeing massive strides in sodium-ion batteries, which use cheap, abundant sodium instead of scarce lithium for energy storage. If we can change the chemistry of the battery, the geopolitical leverage of lithium evaporates. Furthermore, there is the urban mine. We have decades of old electronics, spent batteries, and discarded industrial equipment sitting in landfills. Advances in recycling technology are allowing us to recover critical minerals from waste at a purity level that rivals virgin ore. This is the concept of a circular economy weaponized for national security. Every ounce of cobalt recycled from an old laptop is an ounce we don't have to buy from a Chinese-owned mine in the Congo. Technology is the ultimate asymmetric warfare tool against resource nationalism. Let's look at the horizon. The vision for American resource independence is massive, bordering on the scale of the interstate highway system in terms of ambition. We are talking about the century demand. Projects like the Thacker Pass lithium mine in Nevada or the lithium extraction initiatives in California's Salton Sea are not just commercial ventures, they are nation-building exercises. The Salton Sea alone holds enough lithium to potentially meet the entire nation's demand, but unlocking it requires infrastructure, water rights resolution, and time. The vision being painted by strategists is one where the American West returns to its roots as a resource powerhouse, but this time with 21st century environmental standards. It is a vision of strategic autonomy. This doesn't mean we produce everything. That is autarky, and it is inefficient. But it means we produce enough to have a credible threat of survival. If we can supply 50% of our own needs, a foreign embargo becomes an inconvenience, not a death sentence. This strategic reserve of production capacity creates a psychological safety net for the economy, encouraging investment in high-tech manufacturing because companies know the raw materials will be there. But America cannot do this alone, and this is where geography becomes destiny. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, is more than a trade deal. It is a continental resource fortress. We must analyze the North American bloc. Canada is a mining superpower, sitting on vast, ethically sourced reserves of almost every critical mineral on the Pentagon's list. Mexico has the manufacturing base and labor force to integrate into this supply chain. The logic of friend, shoring, moving supply chains to friendly nations is in full swing. We are building a vertical integration that spans from the mines of Quebec to the battery factories of Michigan to the assembly lines of Monterrey. Beyond the continent, the partnership with Australia, another mining giant, creates a Pacific Resource Alliance. This global collaboration creates a nightmare scenario for any nation trying to use minerals as leverage. If China squeezes supply, the US, Canada, and Australia coordinate to ramp up production and share reserves. This network effect dilutes the power of the monopoly. The more China tries to weaponize its position, the faster it drives the rest of the world into a unified resource, independent bloc. They are inadvertently creating the very coalition that will end their dominance. We must also dissect the interest trap that the current monopoly holder faces. For decades, China accepted the role of the world's dumping ground. Processing rare earths is radioactive, toxic, and environmentally devastating. They accepted this cost to build their economy. But now, as their middle class rises and demands cleaner air and water, the hidden costs of this monopoly are becoming unbearable. They are trapped in a structure where they are doing the dirty work for the world's clean energy transition. Meanwhile, the West, forced by this crisis, is developing cleaner, closed-loop processing technologies. There is a very real possibility that in 10 years the US and its allies will have a smaller, but technologically superior and environmentally cleaner mineral processing industry, while the incumbent is left with a legacy of environmental damage and aging infrastructure. The advantage of holding the monopoly is becoming a burden of maintenance. By forcing the West to diversify, the monopoly holder is losing its best customers and incentivizing the creation of superior competitors. It is a structural trap. Winning the battle for resources today might mean losing the war for industrial leadership tomorrow. So, what is the philosophical conclusion here? It is the ancient wisdom that crisis is the mother of adaptation. Without the threat of a supply chain collapse, the United States would have sleepwalked into total irrelevance. The pressure from across the Pacific was the wake-up call we desperately needed. It forced a bipartisan consensus, rare in Washington, that industrial policy is necessary. It forced environmentalists and miners to sit at the same table to find compromises. It forced automakers to become chemists. This crisis is not a funeral for American industry. It is a cocoon. It is the painful, pressure-filled process of transformation. The external threat has done what internal politics never could. It has aligned national security, economic policy, and technological innovation into a single, coherent vector. We are witnessing the end of the era of complacency and the beginning of an era of strategic resilience. The vulnerability was necessary to trigger the immune response. However, we must remain grounded. To paint a purely optimistic picture would be irresponsible. There are significant risks that could derail this recovery. The permitting purgatory in the United States is real. It still takes 7 to 10 years to open a new mine here, compared to 2 years elsewhere. If we cannot slash this red tape, all the strategy in the world won't dig the lithium out of the ground. There is also the risk of greenflation. As we pay more for ethically sourced, domestically produced minerals, the cost of goods will rise. Are American consumers ready to pay more for a phone or a car to ensure national security? There is also the NIMBY, not in my backyard factor. Everyone wants lithium for their green car, but nobody wants a lithium mine next to their house. These are the micro-level frictions that can grind a macro-level strategy to a halt. We have the plan, but the execution requires a level of political will and public sacrifice that is not guaranteed. Looking forward, the roadmap for the next 5 years focuses on 3 core pillars. First, radical regulatory reform. The administration must streamline the NEPA review process to get shovels in the ground faster without sacrificing environmental safety. This is a delicate balance, but a necessary one. Second, the recycling mandates. We need federal policy that mandates a certain percentage of recycled content in new batteries, effectively creating a guaranteed market for the recycling industry. Third, institutionalizing the alliance. The U.S. need to formalize a critical minerals NATO, a binding agreement that an economic attack on one member's supply chain is an attack on all, triggering automatic resource sharing. These 3 steps turn a defensive posture into an active shield. Watch these 3 areas. If you see progress here, you know we are winning. If these stall, the vulnerability remains. Let's wrap this up with the cold, hard numbers that define our reality. In 2020, the United States was 100% dependent on imports for 17 distinct critical minerals. That was a failing grade. But current projections suggest that by 2030, with the projects currently coming online, that dependency could drop by 40 to 50% for key materials like lithium and rare earth oxides. The timeline is tight, the window is closing, but the trend line has finally reversed. We are no longer falling deeper into the hole, we are climbing out. The March 2025 expansion of the critical minerals list was the moment the US finally stopped digging the hole. The dominance of the competitor is still there, but it is peaking. The future is not one of total control by one nation, but of a diversified, resilient network of democracies protecting their own future. Now, I want to turn this over to you. we've talked about the high costs of national security, higher prices for goods, potential environmental trade-offs in our own backyard. If it meant ensuring that your country couldn't be held hostage by a foreign power, would you be willing to pay 10% or 20% more for your next smartphone or electric vehicle? Or do you think the free market should always chase the lowest price, regardless of the geopolitical cost? This is the debate that will define the next decade. Leave your answer in the comments below. I read them, and I want to know where you stand on the price of freedom.